the tax? Who's ready to build the homes? Who's ready to fix the budget? Who's ready to stop the crime?
Hey gang, what's up? It sounds like Poilievre's army call right there. I wonder who's going to answer the battle cry. I've got a couple of ideas who some of the soldiers in Poilievre's army are going to be. Let's take a quick peek at a number of the studs in the Conservative caucus. It's just fun to watch them go. Let's take a peek. Let's go.
Why doesn't your minister, Minister Haidu, have the professional courtesy to respond to members of Parliament who are duly elected to represent a number of Indigenous nations? Why do I have to plead and beg for a response? This is shameful, it is disgusting, and I hope you relay the message directly to her, how disappointed I am in the way that she conducts her ministry. Thank you.
Okay. We've had multiple witnesses reluctant to appear, citing health issues. This is a serious and repeat problem for us as we try to get to the bottom of this scandal. Mr. McDonald, you referenced in passing someone having a fake heart attack, which is quite a serious allegation. I wonder if you'd be willing to flesh that out a little bit. Who did this, when, and for what purpose?
The honourable member from Thornhill.
Once again, he didn't answer the question, and I'm not really sure what that was. But if he won't listen to Canadians, and they won't listen to their NDP caucus, the Prime Minister won't listen to his successor, Mark Carney, who also wants him to meet with premiers. They won't give us a date. They won't give us a time. They won't tell us what channel to watch. The Prime Minister won't even show up here and answer to this motion. The Prime Minister is being defiant when Canadians are lining up at food banks in record numbers. What are you covering for?
We'd like to know is what his next job is, because after the next election, maybe this carbon tax scam will be gone. Now there's 6 premiers that are demanding a carbon tax meeting because they all know after 8 years this NDP government are like this carbon tax scam and not worth the cost. Why is this Prime Minister hiding? Why doesn't he show some guts, call this meeting so the premiers can tell him to shove his carbon tax where his poll numbers are, in the gutter?
First things we're going to cut is about 70 or 80 Liberal MPs in the next election. And secondly, 9 out of 10 young Canadians believe they'll never own a home under this government. It's embarrassing, Mr. Speaker. Canadians used to be able to pay off a home in 25 years. Now it takes 25 years to save to even afford a down payment. Right. This Prime Minister refuses to listen to our premiers. If he's so proud of his carbon tax, will the Keller of the county come out of his house and actually meet with premiers?
Noted that CBSA identified a resource that was added to one of your task authorizations as a subcontractor, and this resource was KPMG, and she noted that that was unusual. This is one of the 4 largest multinational firms worldwide, and yet they were placed on a tax authorization form as a subcontractor to your company. Do you know who approached KPMG to be put in place as a subcontractor to GC Strategies?
Canadians can't afford to live because of the carbon tax. Common sense Conservatives will axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. After 8 years of this Liberal NDP government, rent and mortgages have doubled. The Liberal NDP government is just not worth the cost or the corruption. Will this Prime Minister commit to immediately passing Bill 234 in its original form, cancel the carbon tax, and once again make life affordable for Canadians?
The great Liberal lies. The budget will balance itself, and the rebate check is larger than the cost of the carbon tax. Everyone knows that is not actually what's happened. And you know who else has joined the carbon tax revolt? 6 premiers in this country who are calling for a carbon tax summit. Newfoundland and Labrador, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Ontario, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. Will this out-of-touch Prime Minister actually call this conference the Carbon Tax Summit, or is he too busy hiding because he called the premiers liars?
Speaker, none of that is true. But what is true is that yesterday in a historic vote, a majority of MPs demanded that the Prime Minister sit down and just listen to the premiers. It's baffling to understand why he's so afraid of meeting with them. It's not like they're going to ask him to put together IKEA furniture or help them move. They just want to put forward better ideas than hiking prices on everything. Yes. What is he so afraid of? Is it Doug? Is it Blaine? I know Scott Moe, Mr. Speaker. He's a really nice guy. Why doesn't the Prime Minister just meet with him?
Speaker, that non-answer is completely unacceptable. Enough of the cover-up. Only a handful of Liberal officials were briefed by CSIS. We now know that a top Liberal broke the law, undermined the work of CSIS, and put the partisan interests of the Liberal Party ahead of national security. So, when did the Prime Minister first learn of this criminal leak, and did he refer it to the RCMP?
Even the NDP Liberal Environment Chair admitted that the carbon tax has no impact on climate change. And yet just last week, the Prime Minister increased the carbon tax by 23%, driving up the cost of gas, groceries, and home heating. If farmers cannot afford to grow food, you have failed as a government. And let me remind everyone, no farms, no food. So will the Prime Minister help bring the cost of food down for Canadians, axe the tax on farmers, and pass Bill C-234 in its original form?
Speaker, Canadians are painfully aware that this Prime Minister and his NDP Liberal government are not worth the cost. Last week's carbon tax hike is driving up the cost of gas, groceries, and home heating. Families are struggling, like I said, to put food on the table, and they cannot afford higher costs. Next week's budget must take the foot off the gas of the rising grocery prices. So once again, Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister axe the tax on farmers and make food more affordable for Canadians?
Absolutely. After 8 years, Canadians are struggling to make ends meet due to the Liberal NDP's crippling carbon taxes. They're all economic pain and no environmental gain. Just last week, the Prime Minister increased the carbon tax by 23%, further driving up the cost of gas, groceries, and home heating. The least they could do is take the carbon tax off the farmers who feed us, which would in turn lower the cost of food. So my question is simple. Will the Prime Minister axe the tax on farmers and make food cheaper for Canadians by passing Bill C-234 in its original form?
Great question.
NDP Liberal government is just not worth the cost. Last week, the Prime Minister increased the carbon tax by 23%, driving up the cost of gas, groceries, and home heating. But on Tuesday, the Liberal Environment Chair revealed there is no proof the carbon tax reduces emissions. Quote, there is no data specifically stating the price on carbon resulted in an X amount of reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, end quote. Now that the carbon tax scam has been exposed by a Liberal, will the Prime Minister finally axe the tax?
The Prime Minister has a superpower. It's the ability to spend other people's money. But I'd like to remind him that it's not his money he's spending. It's the hard-earned dollars of Canadians. He is clear he has no respect for Canadians or their hard-earned dollars. Mr. Speaker, he's just not worth the cost. Will his government commit to a pay-as-you-go rule in the upcoming budget to help fix the financial disaster they caused?
He's not going to back down from his carbon tax obsession. It's clear that he is going to continue to raise the carbon tax on gas, groceries, and home heating and make life even more expensive for Canadians. Shameful. Since the Prime Minister refuses to call a carbon tax election, will he at least meet with the premiers and listen to their plans to make life more affordable?
Canadians are tapped out. April 1st saw Canadians hit with a 23% carbon tax increase by these Liberals. As a farmer, Mr. Speaker, I know the first-hand true impact of carbon tax bills on farm operations. The Prime Minister is not worth the cost. It's time to axe the tax on farmers and food and pass Bill C-234. Will the Prime Minister lower costs on farmers and make food cheaper by passing Bill C-234 in its original form.
The minister is so out of touch because here are the facts. After 8 years of this Liberal NDP government, we have a record-smashing 2 million Canadians using a food bank in a single month, with over 1 million more expected this year. Food banks like the one in Cambridge are now seeing dual-income families, full-time working Canadians, and our seniors lining up at the food banks. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Will this Prime Minister finally show some compassion and make food cheaper for Canadians by passing Bill 234 in its original form?
The NDP Liberal government and the Prime Minister's 23% carbon tax is not worth the cost. The Prime Minister doesn't understand. If you tax the farmer who grows the food, you end up taxing the family who buys it. People are struggling in New Brunswick. 40 to 50 military families need to visit Gagetown Food Bank just to feed their kids. Now, UNB had to create their own food bank to feed their students. Will the Prime Minister lower costs on farmers and make food cheaper by passing Bill 234 in its original form?
And you tax the trucker who hauls the food, then you hurt the families who buy the food. Things have gotten so bad under this Liberal NDP carbon tax coalition that military families stationed in Borden and Gagetown are having to be using food banks. And troops training right here in Ottawa are relying on food donations from college staff. After 8 long years, this Prime Minister isn't worth the cost. Will the Prime Minister lower the cost on Canadian farmers and make food more affordable for all Canadians by passing Bill C-234 in its original form immediately?
Prime Minister's record high debt and deficits, he's not worth the cost of his overpriced socks. Inflation and interest rates continue to make lives worse. Now an economist has said that interest rate cuts may be further delayed because of this NDP Liberal government's out-of-control spending. Conservatives have offered a common-sense solution to fix the upcoming budget. When will this Prime Minister stop his out-of-control deficits with a dollar-for-dollar rule? Find $1 in savings for every new dollar he spends.
Addiction to spending is out of control. They're getting high off an unsafe supply of drugs and borrowed money. Their spending habit is driving up inflation. Interest rate cuts might be stalled because of out-of-control spending. Their far-left allies in BC just had their credit rating cut. This Prime Minister and his socialist coalition are not worth the cost. This government must find $1 in savings for every dollar spent. Will the Prime Minister cap spending with a dollar-for-dollar rule to bring down...
This Prime Minister continues to demonstrate that he's not worth the cost. This government has added more to the national debt than all previous Prime Ministers combined. Yes, combined. And now a leading economist has stated that interest rates cuts are being delayed because of this massive government overspending. Will the Prime Minister cap government spending with a dollar-for-dollar rule, which finds $1 of savings for every dollar of new spending, so that interest rates come down and people can stay in their homes?
Great job, Dave. Great.
But Canadians need a home, and Canada has not built any fewer homes than we did back in the 1970s, where our population was half of what it is today. We need 320,000 units being built before 2030. This requires a record pace of construction, which will already exhaust an already burnt-out workforce. Canadians need solutions. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Will this Prime Minister stop making announcements and just get the houses built?
Inflation and high interest rates. And they understand that government deficits cause inflation. Runaway deficits cause runaway inflation. This year's deficit is expected to be $47 billion, $7 billion higher than forecast. To say this is a runaway is an understatement. The Bank of Canada, the governor, has been clear. Deficits are the main factor keeping interest rates high. Will the Prime Minister cap his runaway spending with a dollar-for-dollar rule to bring down interest rates and inflation?
Interest rates so high, Mr. Speaker,
Liberal deficit spending, that's what. Yes. Now we can add Scotiabank to the long list of economists saying after 8 years, this NDP Liberal government is not worth the cost. Record high deficits are keeping housing, food and fuel at record high prices. Will the Prime Minister fix the budget and adopt our common sense conservative policy by bringing in a dollar for dollar rule to bring down inflation and interest rates?
Speaker, 300% more government-issued opioids are being seized by police in British Columbia. More drugs on the street mean the street prices for opioids are falling across this country, and that's what we're seeing. This delusional NDP Liberal government wants you to think that giving out free drugs to our most vulnerable is a cure. But Canadians know this is nonsense. When will this narcissistic Prime Minister, who's not worth the cost, crime or corruption, end this cruel and disaster?
Which shows us there are some people that look, it seems like you can never trust a politician, right? But it does seem that there's one group of politicians that we can trust a little more than another group of politicians. It's so confusing, it's hard to tell. The stakes are so high, it seems like times are changing so dramatically. We've never seen these kinds of tough times since, I think, the Depression. I think. We'll see. I wasn't there. Anyhow, I'm Aaron. Question Period Canada. Like, subscribe. Come check out one of our live Question Period broadcasts. They're a lot of fun. We've got a great community, a fun chat room. You'll like it there. That's it. Aaron, thank you for watching. Have something healthy to eat. Try to stay warm. Catch you next video. Thanks a lot for watching.
In every single province the federal carbon tax applies, middle-class Canadians pay more than they get back, according to the Parliamentary Budget Officer. And the Prime Minister, by the way, he should stop gaslighting and attacking the premiers and other common-sense Canadians. He is lying when he says the carbon tax makes you better off. The Parliamentary Budget Officer has calculated that in every province, 60% of Canadians pay more in carbon tax costs than they get back. Everybody knows it. Justin Trudeau knows it. He needs to stop lying and sit down with the premiers and admit that his carbon tax is just like him, not worth the cost.